This is part 2 of our North Korean trip. If you have not seen part 1, check the description box and watch that one first. On day 4 we woke up and again you're right back in it. We went to this park where we saw obviously some statues and some monuments, and then we went to the main statue of the two leaders, which are the two big statues that everybody kind of recognizes when you see them. They're standing next to each other with their arms out, embracing Korea and embracing their lands. This was awkward also. You know, they take you through this park and you buy flowers for the leaders, and you have no choice. You buy the flowers. So this was one of the things where you had no choice. You buy the flowers, then you take them to the foot of these statues. You place the flowers in front of the great leaders, and then you have to bow. I think you have to bow 3 times, and there's no way out of it. So by day 4, most of the people were very kind of fed up with the trip. The general feeling of North Korea, the general attitude had changed by day 4. The first 2 days, everything's new and exciting. The 3rd day, you're kind of like, okay, settling into things. By the 4th day, you're like, this is getting like too much. The feeling in the group had changed, and nobody wanted to bow before the leaders, but we had to. I mean, you can't not do it. There is no choice, basically. And you can see in the video, some people bowed properly and some people kind of just nodded their head. But by this day, everybody was getting pretty tired. So the first activity, they got us up bowing for the leaders, and then afterwards, this is when you could either go on the helicopter ride or go ride the subway. So we went and rode the subway, but we also have footage of the helicopter ride. So you can see what the helicopter ride looks like. The reason we didn't do it, which I'm kind of disappointed that we didn't, but it was 150 euros per person. So it would have been 300 euros for Yvon and I to take, I think it was like a 45-minute helicopter ride around the city, around the capital. And then also they had a fancy lunch, afternoon lunch. But we went to the subway, which is also pretty cool.
Heading into the subway of Pyongyang. And I've heard it's about 100 meters deep. And it looks like it's 100 meters deep.
So the subway system is, it's funny because there's not a lot of stops, and one of the things when you read about North Korea is the journalists always say that there's only like 2 stops in Pyongyang, because you get on and then you ride like 1 or 2 stops and then you get off. But on each of those stops, the subway system itself is quite beautiful. The stations are well designed. And the murals that they have on the walls are really beautiful. I mean, it's propaganda, obviously, but it's well designed, it's very pretty. And the trains themselves had a certain throwback style to it, because the trains looked like they were from the, you know, 70s or 80s. So the train cars themselves are not your modern subway line. They're kind of this old-fashioned looking carriage, and it's really an interesting experience. I enjoyed it a lot. Here in the subway, there's everyday North Koreans, and so you can see some of the people. And there's people down there reading newspapers, because they put the newspapers on these little kind of carousels, so you can flip through it and read the newspaper. There's people down there reading the newspaper. There's people seemingly going to work. There's a lot of people in the subway. No idea what any of them were doing. But it is a city of like 1 or 2 million people. I'd have to look it up. I think it's 1 million plus people. And so people go to work, people go to the museum. So there's certain things that I think aren't staged, obviously, because that would be insane. So these people are normal North Koreans going about their lives. Obviously they're the 1%, they're the elite, and they know not to talk to foreigners. Nobody wanted to talk to us, nobody even was like looking at us, they tried to ignore us. So I don't think it was staged necessarily, but the attitude is it's not safe for them to try and, you know, strike up a conversation with some tourists, because somebody's going to see it, somebody's going to report it, and if they're not allowed to talk to tourists, they could get in trouble. But being down there in the subway, you could feel kind of what it was like for them to be going about their day. I don't know what they were doing, but that experience was interesting, to be there with the people, because for us, we were looking at them. We were looking at their faces, we were looking at their clothes, we were looking at their cell phones, because they do have cell phones. You know, it's one of those things where the country is operating pretty much like a normal country, and so watching them and looking at them was fascinating. So on day 5 we woke up and we went to this museum, and this museum was really bizarre, because this museum was where all of the gifts that have ever been given to the North Korean leaders are stored. So any foreign president or ambassador, or pretty much any foreign delegation that has come to North Korea, oftentimes they'll exchange gifts. It might be something simple from their country, like a bottle of wine, or some pens, or some kind of plaque or something, you know, saying that we're working with North Korea, or some kind of agreement, you know, friendship agreement or something. But in this museum, they had saved every piece of paper, every pen, every napkin. Anything that was given as a gift to the leaders was stored in this museum, all the way up to a full-size train that was given to North Korea from Russia, which was just really interesting to see, because there was all these little artifacts, just little cups and bowls and pens, and, you know, a lot of like little knives, ceremonial knives and daggers, and some guns. And, you know, some bigger items like the train. They were all in this museum, and you could walk through and see them. But the feeling was really, in my mind, sad, because they were trying to show that they were a legitimate government by saying, look, you know, all these other governments have actually given us gifts and recognized that we are the rulers of North Korea. And with that, most of the gifts were from the 70s and 80s, when there was a lot more communist and socialistic governments around the world. So a lot from South America, a lot from Africa, a lot from Eastern Europe, when the USSR was still a union, right?
And we're here at one of the halls where all the gifts for the leaders are being collected and being shown. Yeah. We just went inside, and it wasn't allowed to film or take photos inside, so we have to do it with this outside view, which I'll show you.
And then after that, we went to a temple. There wasn't a whole lot of information about the temple. And then on the way back, we went to the birthplace of Kim Il-sung, supposedly. And then finally, when we got back into Pyongyang, we went bowling. And the bowling part was a lot of fun.
Alright, after we visited the birthplace of Kim Il-sung, we are now at the bowling alley. We're gonna go bowling. Pretty awesome. I haven't gone bowling in like forever, so we'll see how it will go.
Again, we could spend time kind of interacting with the local people. Again, it's not real interaction, but you can look at them, you can see how they laugh, you can see how they behave with one another, and It was a lot of fun. Obviously bowling's fun, and then bowling in North Korea is an interesting experience because you're there in it, enjoying it. I had the highest score, so I won the bowling tournament that we had. So that was cool. Obviously bowling is fun, and then just being in the atmosphere with so much noise and so many people, and looking around and seeing how they interact with each other, and you know, they are looking at us, but they're trying not to kind of stare, kind of make eye contact. They're generally curious about foreigners, but they also know that there is danger, I suppose, in being too open. But in the bowling alley, you could look around, you see people enjoying their time playing. They seemed happy. Is it all staged? I don't know. That's the thing. It's hard to know. Because you could ideally have, you know, 200 people in a bowling alley be paid actors, or be paid as part of their job to stand in, to look and have this appearance of people are normal, people are happy in North Korea. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I think it wasn't staged. Maybe they were allowed to be there during the times that foreigners are there, but I think genuine human emotion is hard to fake, and they did seem happy. Is it real? I don't know. I mean, that's the hardest thing. That's kind of one of the things that was most startling, is how normal everything felt. You go in with all these preconceived notions about how it's going to be, and there's a lot of tension because you don't know what to expect, and there's tension throughout the whole trip. The whole time we were there, there was a lot of tension because you're almost expecting the other shoe to drop, there to be something more, because you always have these preconceived notions of North Korea and what it's like. But at the end of the day, when we left after our 5 days, nothing bad happened. Obviously we went, we experienced it, and we came back. Was it staged? Possibly. I don't know. A lot of it was definitely staged. Parts of it maybe were less staged. Was it a bad trip? Absolutely not. It was probably one of the easiest trips we've ever been on, because Yvon and I combined, we've traveled to over 30 countries, and usually when we travel, we do all the planning. We get all the transportation, we get the hotels, we get the flights, we get everything organized ourselves. When we paid the money to go on this tour, that was basically it. You pay the money, and then everything is taken care of. And so I think that was one of the aspects that was so unsettling about it, was it was one of the easiest trips we've ever done. We literally showed up, handed over our passports, obeyed the tour guides. You know, they said, we're gonna do this. We said, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Sure, no problem. And didn't cause any problems, didn't cause any fuss. And when we got back to the airport, they said, here's your passport, have a safe flight home. And so I think that was one of the unsettling things, was how normal it was, in the sense of there wasn't some scary conspiracy to get us, or to you know, brainwash us or anything. Sure, there was a lot of propaganda, but it was just the way they see history. And it may not be the way that we see history. I mean, it definitely wasn't the way that we see history. But overall, the experience was normal. The food wasn't great, but we've been to many places where the food isn't great. The accommodations weren't that great, but we've been to many places where the accommodations are not that great. Transportation wasn't that great, but if you're traveling anywhere in Asia, a lot of the transportation is bad. You know, I think that was one of the most unsettling things, is how normal it was. You know, the people were dressed well, the people were friendly enough without being overly friendly. The tour guides spoke great English, and they could explain everything we were doing, where we were going, why we were going there. So there was never a moment of, you know, great confusion or great difficulty when we were there. And I think that's one of the things that was so unsettling about this trip. Would I go back? You know, some of the people on the tour have actually gone back. One of our friends that we made on the tour, he went back to run the marathon. They have the marathon, and he went back recently to run the Pyongyang marathon. Would I personally go back? I don't know. I think the two things that could draw me back was if I wanted to run a marathon, it could be an interesting place to do it. I'm not a runner, so that's kind of not really something I'd be interested in. The other thing that could entice me to go back would be the mass games. And they stopped them for a while, but I heard they were going to restart them. I'd have to look into it, but the mass games looked really, really fascinating. It looked pretty cool to go and experience the mass games. So those would probably be the two things that would make me go back. If I was just to go back for a tourism trip, just to do the tour like we did, no, I wouldn't go back. Would I recommend it? I don't think so. I don't think you need to see it. You know, one of the things that was really surprising to me was what we did, all the things that we did on our tour was pretty much all the things that the journalists do on their press tours. We went to the supermarket and we got currency, which is a big, ooh, no. The news reporters are always like, oh, we're not supposed to be doing this, but we're gonna do this. We did that. We went to the place of Kim Il-sung's birth. News reporters do that. We went to the shooting range. News reporters do that. So if you watch a news report, or you watch a travel vlog, or you watch some kind of documentary about travel in North Korea, you don't necessarily have to go. It's pretty much what you see is what you get. What you often see is videos will sensationalize it in a way to try and make you obviously more interested, to heighten the experience. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to travel. You just go, and the tour guides, minders, will take you everywhere you need to go, and you just enjoy it as much as you can. You know, at the end of the trip, most of the people in the tour were pretty unhappy. Most of them were ready to leave. We had some interesting characters, like I said, explaining the old guy. We also had a British guy who was very flamboyant, and he actually spoke Korean because he lived in Korea for a few years, and he had a Korean boyfriend, South Korean boyfriend. So his experience there was very different than, say, my experience. And at the end, he was freaking out a little bit, like he needed to leave. So everybody's experience is going to be different. For Yvon and I, we took it with kind of a grain of salt, like, oh, this is just something we could do. It was fun. It was interesting. Would you enjoy it? It really depends on the person. We didn't have as much shock as some of the other people who had never lived in a country like China, because North Korea felt like what I imagine China was in the 60s and 70s, kind of very closed, a lot of propaganda. So we had kind of an already limited exposure of kind of what we were getting into. For, like, say, the British guy who was flying straight from London to Beijing and then on to North Korea, Pyongyang, he was freaking out, and he had brought one of his friends, and she was freaking out too, because it was so much and so intense that they couldn't handle it. As for somebody like Yvon and myself, we were more adjusted, I think, having lived in China for many years before going to North Korea. It was kind of very intense, but it wasn't to the point that we couldn't handle it. Most nights we just went back to the hotel room and kind of laughed at how ridiculous the whole thing was. And that was our experience. So I hope you guys liked this video about our trip to North Korea. A lot of the footage was taken from the CD that we were given at the end. It wasn't the best footage, but that's kind of how North Korea is. You don't get a lot of great footage because there's not a lot of opportunity to film. And when we went there, we weren't really necessarily thinking about filming, so there's a lot of shaky cam. But I think that adds to the rawness and kind of what you'll really feel and see when you're there. It's kind of that shaky cam rawness versus kind of what the propaganda department gave us when we were leaving. We bought it for like 20 euros, which is like the smooth pans and the nice shots. Overall, I hope you guys like this. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and check out some of the day-to-day vlogs that we did. I will link them below. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.